Welcome everybody. I'm Michael Maxwell, owner of Market Wines at Findlay Market. This is my good friend Michael Schiaparelli. Normally this time of year we would be doing our annual sparkling wine and champagne tasting, but 2020 being a different year, obviously with the mask we're doing things just a little bit differently this year. So we have decided to do a little bit virtual and make it a little bit more educational as well. So we're still going to have a selection of 6 wines for you guys this year, but these will be wines for you guys to take home and enjoy at your leisure. But we're going to talk about each of these wines individually and a little bit about sparkling wine and how sparkling wine became to be what it is and how it's made. Michael works for Skurnik Wine Vintner Select, where all of these wines come from. We're fortunate to have some of the best small production sparkling wines in this area available to us through Skurnik Wines, and it's very, very lucky for us to be able to do this here tonight. So anyway, so we have 6 fantastic wines, but first we're going to get started with a little bit of information about sparkling wine and champagne and where it all began.
So as Michael said, we're going to try 6 different sparkling wines tonight. Not all sparkling wine is champagne, although you'll hear a lot of people kind of use the term champagne to describe sparkling wines from all over the world. Champagne is really only sparkling wine from a specific region in France called Champagne. Other wines we're going to try tonight are from Italy, from Spain, other wines from France that are not champagne, and wines that are made domestically in the United States. Occasionally, if you look on the bottom shelf of some retail stores, you'll see American wines labeled as champagne. Those are made in the United States, and the only reason they can continue to use champagne on their labels because they've been around since before we agreed to the rules that prohibited the use of the word champagne on those bottles. We'll talk a little bit about the history of sparkling wine. Sparkling wines have been around for as long as wine has been around. Usually the bubbles in the wine were seen as a flaw, that something had gone wrong, but nobody really knew how wine was made until the late 1800s. Before that, they thought it was just kind of a miracle that this grape juice turned into alcohol, and sometimes it got bubbles in it and sometimes it didn't. You'll often see Dom Perignon, a Benedictine monk who lived in the 1600s, credited with the invention of sparkling wine. Sparkling wine was made for intentionally probably 100 years before that. But they still didn't know exactly what they were doing and how it was, or what was making it happen. It wasn't until a guy named Charles Maret, who was an Englishman, realized that by adding a little bit of extra sugar to the wine, that the yeast would create bubbles once you capped it, and he was the first person to really intentionally make sparkling wine in the bottle. So today there are 3 main methods that are used to make sparkling wine. There's the Charmat method, or tank fermentation. There's the ancestral method, which today you'll see labeled Pet Nat very often. And there's the method champenoise, which is the method that's used to make champagne, although today there's limited legally as to who can put method champenoise, so you'll see traditional method written on the bottom.
Sometimes Methode Classico, depending on the areas, but method champenoise has been, for the most part, reserved for the champagne growing region, whereas even if you make it in the exact same style, even in France, you're going to see it labeled as something else. And quite often if you see Cremant, and it'll be Cremant d'Alsace or Cremant de Jura, Cremant de Bourgogne in the case of one of our wines here tonight, it is going to be made in that same style, but just from outside the Champagne region. Method champenoise is just specifically reserved for Champagne, but many sparkling wines are made in that same style and method. Probably not as arduous as they do in the Champagne region, though.
So the tank method, or Charmat method, was actually invented in France under the Napoleonic era as a way to make sparkling wine less expensively and more efficiently. But now it's rarely used anywhere in France, but you see it very often used in Italy, where it's the method that's used to make the first wine we're going to taste in a few minutes.
Yeah, Charmat being inexpensive, a lot of people will ask, well, what's the price difference? Why is there such a varying price in sparkling wines? And part of it is the region and the history, and part of it is the method. Charmat is a quick, easy way. When it's Charmat, wine made in the Charmat style, the time from harvest to the time it hits the shelf is usually less than a year. It can be as little as 6 months. True champagnes take 2 to 3 years just for the introductory ones, and some of the vintage ones will be 8-10 years before disgorgement. So a much longer time, a much longer investment, therefore a lot more expensive. Whereas the Charmat method, you can get them out to the shelf quick and easy, and you don't have to wait that long for your turn to get your money back, to get your turnaround on your dollar. Now, with Method Champenois, you're getting a lot more involved. The amount of cost from the fact that the bottles tend to be even just a slight bit thicker than they are going to see on the Charmat method, because they're usually under a little bit more pressure. You also spend a lot more time with hands-on methods. So the racking and the riddling, disgorgement, all these things are usually, in most champagne houses, are things that are done by hand. Riddling being one of those really long processes where the bottle is taken and turned slightly. As it's turned, it's also brought upright to where all the sediment comes down to the bottom of the bottle. This is something that takes a lot of time and effort. This adds to the cost of the wine. The more labor on anything, the more expensive it's going to be. And so that was also a big part of why champagne is going to cost a little bit more. The other thing is that a lot of times champagne will be harvested with smaller yields. The really good producers want to make sure that their grapes have the right amount of sugar, or bricks as we say, in the grape, and the acidity level is in balance. And for those things to happen, they want to make sure that the vines don't yield too much fruit, because it's harder to get that balance. So therefore, Champagne area grapes are going to have a little bit lower yields per acre, producing higher quality wine. And that's pretty much the truth for grapes throughout the world, in any vineyard you're talking about, but specifically you'll see that a lot more in Champagne versus your other traditional sparkling wines that will get slightly larger volumes, which makes it also a little bit less expensive. So our first sparkling wine we're doing tonight is the Biancaviglia DOCG Prosecco. Prosecco is what we were talking about done the Charmat method. So it's that little bit lighter, crisper, not quite as rich as you'll see from the champagnes, but for that reason, it makes a fantastic drink for breakfast, brunch, and into lunch. It's a nice warm weather drink as well. Really goes great and refreshing with things like sorbet and fruit. This wine is made 100% from the Glera grape, and years ago, not that long ago, Prosecco was kind of in limbo and as to what it was and what made a good Prosecco, and there were all kinds of products all over the place. Prosecco was the name of a grape, but there was wines being produced that were called Prosecco that were sparkling wines that weren't made with that particular grape. So the Italian government, trying to protect their big export of Prosecco, which has been growing fast over the last several years, came up with an idea to change the name of the grape to Glera and the style of the wine to Prosecco, to kind of preclude anyone from making that wine in any other way other than the Charmant method with the Glera grape. There's specific areas that it can be grown in, and only a few areas where it can be considered DOCG, which is the top growing classification in Italy. This wine is made by a brother and sister team, Elena and Enrica Moscato. Fantastic aromatics on this. It has a really clean finish. It goes fantastic with, like I say, sorbet and other types of fruit, but it really goes nicely too with, like I say, with things like typical Italian brunch. And does nice with savory things like bacon. Like a lot of sparkling wines, so those salty kind of things go very well with it.
I would just add, an interesting thing about Prosecco is it's always a white wine until next year. They've actually allowed producers in Prosecco to make rosé Prosecco starting in January of 2021. So by next fall, you might start to see them on the shelf.
Yeah, it's just extremely controversial because I remember talking to multiple Prosecco producers about this because all of them seem to make a rosé, but it just had to be called, Italian rosé with bubbles. Or there was really no specific classification for it. And I asked them, I said, you make a fantastic rosé, and yet you have to charge less for it than you do for your Prosecco. Do you think they'll ever make a Prosecco Rosé? And all of them said adamantly, no, there's no way that there'll be a Prosecco Rosé. Well, eventually money talks, and the fact that they could probably found that they could make more money for their Prosecco Rosé than they could for sparkling rosé from Italy, it probably is a big influence into why they allowed that to happen.
Right. The other thing that Mike said that I would reiterate is this DOCG. When buying Prosecco, if you can find DOCG, which come from a specific area in the Prosecco zone called Valdobbiadene, those are really the finest Proseccos. They're usually not a lot more money than ones just bottled as DOC, but they're a big step up in quality, so I would always recommend you look for it. And if it's there, think about buying that product.
And I'd also just like to mention that this wine is $19.99 a bottle. So the top growing area, and you can get it at $19.99.
So the second wine is Cava. Cava is sparkling wine from Spain. There's, I think, 6 different regions in Spain that can produce Cava in the DO, but the most famous and probably 90% of the wine is produced in Penedès, where this one comes from, which has very chalky soils. This is where Cava was invented in the 1870s by a guy named Josep Raventos. His family still makes wine in the area. The wines are always made using the traditional method. So this is the same method used to make champagne, but the grapes are not the same grapes. These are traditional grapes from Spain. This is made from all 3 of the traditional grapes, Macabeo, Xarel-lo, and Parellada. Cavas are tremendously good values compared to champagne.
Yeah.
Beautiful wines, but they do not sell at quite the same premium that champagne tends to sell at.
Yeah. Just recently, I think it was the Raventos family that, part of the family that did a change in the DO system in Spain. They felt like they had some of their higher end wines that they should be differentiated from just traditional Cava, so they came up with a new classification. However, that classification is a really hard to say name, which so it's not as easy to come across. But there are some pushes for top end the sparkling wine in Spain to be elevated beyond just the Cava. But I think Cava for a long time has become synonymous with, much like cheap Prosecco, cheap sparkling wine from Italy, or inexpensive sparkling wine from Spain. I think the beauty of it is even in the top sparkling wines, they're still considered to be very good values.
Yes. And as Mike pointed out, there's specific, this is a DO wine, which is the equivalent of DOC wine from Italy. There's very specific rules that the producers have to follow in order to bottle their wines with that designation. This wine goes above and beyond, so to get the Cava DO, the wine would have to be aged on the lees for a minimum of 9 months. They aged the wine for 18 months on the lees, giving it a lot more richness, a lot more complex aromatic character to it. And again, would normally push the cost up because you're doing more than the minimum required. But beautiful, beautiful wines.
Yeah, these wines, yeah, a lot of the sparkling wines you'll come across and say, well, they go great with. There's certain things that can cross the board will go fantastic with, but I like Cavas a lot with mussels. A lot of those traditional seafood things like certain shellfishes. I think Cava sells really well with. Alright, so the wine geek in us will often wax poetic about the Burgundy region, and when you hear some people that are very much into wine talk about the Burgundy region, they'll start espousing all the wonderful beauties of it. But most of the time we're talking about the still wines. However, a lot of the grapes that they use to make still wines in Burgundy make fantastic sparkling wines, and a lot of the same grapes that they use to make sparkling wine in Champagne. Not too far away in Burgundy, the Victoire, the Chastonnay, Cremant de Bourgogne, as we were talking about, made Cremant de Bourgogne means from the Burgundy region, made in that same style of Champagne. So this is made with about 85% of red grapes and the rest white grapes, all from the Côte de Butte and the Côte de Beaune, some of the better growing areas in Burgundy. So these grapes are not coming from the larger producing areas like the Maconnais or the Beaujolais. These wines would also create a high demand in dollar if they were made into still wines. This is a fantastic value on its own, though, and it's $16.99 a bottle. With Burgundy, I find that a lot of those things that we love in Burgundy also work really well in their Cremants. Mushrooms and truffles, those things with these sparkling wines do exceedingly well. I think that this uses the four kind of the main grapes that you'll see in Burgundy. It pretty much consists of Pinot Noir, Gamay. Those are the dominant of the grapes, the red grapes. But there's also a little bit of Aligoté and Chardonnay. So fantastic value at $16.99, but it's also one that I think it kind of overshoots what a lot of people are looking for. So if you're looking for champagne and you're looking to cover some of those champagne food items, but you don't have quite that budget, this is perfect for that. Anything else to say about this guy?
Yeah. It's important to note that a lot of producers of Cremant Bourgogne will do it kind of as an afterthought, and most of their wines will be still wines. They can sell at a higher price point. This producer only makes sparkling wines. It's really their focus is to make Cremant. They also make a rosé Cremant that I think is lime priced.
Yeah, it's the same price. Yeah.
Same price as the regular bottling. The other thing I wanted to point out is that even though it's made from 85% red grapes, this is a white champagne, white sparkling wine, not a rosé.
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of that in where red grapes are used in the production, particularly in France and domestically speaking. We'll use red grapes in the production of sparkling wine. We've talked about, I talk about this all the time, that if you were to take most grapes, the red grapes, split them down the middle, inside the pulp is going to be clear. There's no color to it. All the color from a red wine comes from the skin. So you can make a Cabernet Sauvignon that's completely white, clear, as long as you don't allow any kind of skin contact or any of that pigment to leach out of the skin by pressing or fermentation while the skins are still in contact. So for that reason, you'll sometimes see wines called Blanc de Noir. That means that it is going to be a completely white wine, but it's made with red grapes. Our domestic offering, fourth one on the tasting day, is from Planet Oregon, which is in Willamette Valley. The Willamette Valley has a big Pinot Noir growing area in Oregon. This is made from 100% Pinot Noir. This is rosé bubbles, as they call it. And their winery itself is certified sustainable. That means that they take into account everything that they do, not only what they put into the land, but what they do as far as harvesting. You have to worry about, tractor emissions, winery emissions, what you do with your, how much CO2 you put out, your carbon footprint. A lot of things within a sustainable winery. I know a lot of people talk about natural wines and about organic wines. Sustainable is also a really good way to ensure that you're using a producer that takes care of what they do with the land.
I think it's particularly important in Oregon,
Yeah.
where they had problems with all kinds of agricultural runoff affecting the salmon industry.
Yeah.
So they really had a big focus on sustainable agriculture and sustainable industry to try to protect other segments of the economy in Oregon.
Yeah. So one of the things I also like to try to demonstrate to people is the proper way to open up a bottle of sparkling wine. A lot of times you'll see sparkling wines produced with this foil on it. This producer decided not to do that. Originally it was because during disgorgement a lot of times, during champagne, sometimes they would have different fills in there, and people would go through and pick around and not take the ones that were filled lower. You'd have any kind of consistency, so they put these over. That way you couldn't really tell how low the fill. And truthfully, the amount of wine that's in the neck from here to here does not make a whole lot of difference. You're talking less than an ounce, maybe half an ounce. But one of the things you want to do, and once you get the foil off, is you put your thumb on top of the cork. Try to never open up a bottle of sparkling wine without your thumb on the cork. The reason that they have these cages on here is because obviously there's a lot of pressure in here. Sparkling wine means gas, and that gas will push the cork out if you're not careful. So what you want to do is put your thumb right on top of there, and then you pull out of the tab and you do a twist. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 6 twists is pretty traditional in what you'll see and how they cut this down. So you loosen up your cage, and then you grab the cork and you twist. You shouldn't need to twist a lot because the pressure in there should be pushing that cork out, and you gradually just let it come out slowly, and you work it where it just comes out. You should hear a very light gush like that of air come out. You should not have the big loud pop. It's a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed it a couple times doing it too, where you get the big pop, you're all excited, you see them do it. What you'll do is you'll end up losing a lot of product as well, and it will cause a lot of your CO2 to rush out. So just kind of a nice, easy, sometimes people will wrap a towel around it as well to give you a little bit better grip and to ensure that that doesn't come out. And then you pour it into your vessel of choice. Traditionally, I think a lot of people see sparkling wine served in champagne flutes, and I love using champagne flutes. They're fun, they've got a great, nice long stem, they're easy to walk around with.
Really show off the bubbles.
Yeah, though you can see the bubbles come through. It is spectacular to see it done in that style. However, most champagne aficionados will tell you that to evaluate, to taste, and get the full aromatics, a glass similar to this style is a much better. I think Terry Thies, one of the great importers of small grower producer sparkling wines, always at his tastings uses a glass of that sort. So, you know, either one works fantastic. I think you're able to smell a little bit more of the aromatics out of one of these glass, but again, the bubbles really seem to really come through in the flute, and it just adds a lot of festiveness to the occasion. I think the Planet Oregon Pinot Noir is a beautiful example of what domestically is happening with sparkling wine. I think more and more we're seeing people gravitate towards sparkling wine and finding that it, again, does go with such a wide range of food, and you're seeing that quality kind of shift through.
Let me try this and
Here,
then
try.
talk about it for a second.
Yeah. So we're going to cheers, step apart, yeah. And then we'll come back and talk a little bit about what we're tasting. Tell you, one of the things that would be fantastic with this, and we were talking about it, we saved the salmon. We saved the salmon because we want to eat the salmon. And salmon would go fantastic with this. When I think of one of my favorite salmon things around here is across the street from us, the duo of salmon salad at French Crust, Jean Robert's French Crust. And I think this with the duo of salmon on the croissant would be fantastic.
Right.
I would love that.
Which I'm sure you can get to go.
Yes, you absolutely can get to go.
Right.
As a matter of fact, you come and pick up some of your wines for the champagne tasting. You can grab some duo salmon sandwiches to share with whoever you're doing it with, tasting with.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
So our fifth wine that we're going to finish up with two champagnes. This is the first of the champagnes, Gaston Chiquet, Premier Cru champagne. So from the true champagne growing area, this is going to be dominated by red grapes again, Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir with some Chardonnay in as well. Those red grapes add a nice layer of complexity and richness to it, and you get that kind of bright crispness from the Chardonnay. They kind of balance each other out very nicely. So this comes from Premier Cru Vineyards. You'll see in Champagne, much as other areas of France, they kind of designate vineyards, and they did this years ago, as to which were the best vineyards, Premier Cru, and then top vineyards being Grand Cru. Pretty much everywhere in Champagne that they are producing champagne from are good vineyards, and there's some areas that make some fantastic. So no mistake the fact that Premier Cru vineyards are the only, or Grand Cru vineyards are the only champagne to drink. There are some unbelievably great producers, Musée being one of them, that I really enjoy, that don't have any Premier Cru or Grand Cru vineyards in their growing area, yet make spectacular wines. But it is an indication that these vineyards produce fantastic wines. This is a really great story, though. The Gaston Chiquet is produced by and originally by two brothers, and those two brothers make this wine. Let's go ahead. Not really getting the full effect of what I want to say, but we can break it up and come back to that.
You want to jump in and tell this part?
Yeah, you go ahead and tell this part, because
Okay, we're still rolling, right?
Okay.
So Gaston Chiquet is a super historic property. The family's been growing grapes in Champagne since the 1740s. The two brothers, one of whom was Gaston Chiquet and his brother in 1919, were among the very first producers to actually grow their own grapes, make their own champagne, and bottle it under their own name. Before that, and even today, lots of producers grow grapes, and then other companies called negociants will buy the grapes, negotiate to buy the grapes, they'll bring them in and they'll make the wine. Gaston Chiquet were one of the first of what today we call grower champagnes. They grow the grapes themselves. They are passionate about growing great grapes, and they really want to show off the quality of their grapes, not just sell them to somebody else and have them mixed in with other people's grapes. They really want to show quality.
One of the things that kind of hammers that home is, in a lot of cases, the big producers will pay by the ton. They'll say, you get so many dollars for however much ton you produce. Well, I was talking earlier about how grapes will, growers will cut the grapes down to produce better quality grapes. If you're getting paid by the ton, you want as many grapes as you can to put on. So you don't cut your fruit. You allow all the fruit to ripen as much as you can. As soon as it's as full and heavy as you can, you harvest it and you send it off. But you're not getting that balance between sugar and acidity. So for the grower producers, these guys decide that they want to harvest the grapes at the premium quality of sugar and balance between acidity. They'll also cut their harvests down to ensure that they get exactly what they're looking for. So therefore they might produce a little bit less, but by making it themselves and selling it themselves, they can make up that difference to the fact that they weren't making the big money by selling it to someone else.
Want to break for a second? You want to talk about what this tastes like? Is that the...
Sure, we can talk a little bit.
What else you want to talk about?
I don't know. I'm going to talk about...
It's got some big scores, but...
Yeah.
So this says
it's
candy berry, lazy hint of bread dough, which to me that really is one of the differences in champagne. You really get that yeasty kind of lazy kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Talk about that and talk about... Well, I want to talk about one of the things I want to talk about too is that a lot of times we do like big meat dishes with big red wines. I said, but the acidity in champagne it goes fantastic with a really marbled piece of meat. It has the flavor to stand up to it, but also the acidity to cut through the fat.
Right.
So we'll talk about that too. So you want to talk about the flavor profile, and I'll talk about the food pairing.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
So the Gaston Chiquet is really a great example of champagne. Champagne to me should have sort of a slightly yeasty, kind of lazy kind of character to it that reminds you of like fresh dough. This definitely shows that character, but it's got beautiful fruit to it and terrific balancing acidity that makes it a great partner with all kinds of different foods.
Yeah, I really find that a lot of times when you talk about a big piece of fatty meat, a big nice marbled steak, a lot of times the impulse is to always go to a big red wine. And for me, champagne really is a better pairing for a lot of those cases, because the acidity and the sparkle will cut through all the richness of that fat and help clean the palate up, but it also has enough flavor to stand up to the aromatic flavors to stand up to the gaminess of the meat. So I think one of the things the champagne pairs great with, I say go with big red meat.
Never a wrong time.
Never wrong. There is a never wrong time, in my opinion, to go with sparkling wine though. The last wine of the tasting goes to the Champagne Jean Vassal, Hugues de Pedry. This is a classic favorite, and actually one that we've had on and off of Market Wines for a number of years. It's something that I've really enjoyed, and it was, some of you might remember, we did this quite some time ago. This is made from 100% Pinot Noir. It is just very, very, very pale salmon. The Eau de Pedry is Eye of the Partridge, is what that means, and that kind of refers to the little tinge in a partridge's eye. Apparently had that kind of color that this wine has. So not a dark rosé by any stretch, but that little bit more color than you'll see from your typically Blanc de Noir.
So a lot like the Gaston Chiquet, the family was early to the game in making grower champagne, growing the grapes and making their own wine. In 1972, the grandson of the original winemakers who started in the early 1900s found some very old bottles of sparkling wine. When he opened them up, they had this very pale pink color to them, and he was surprised because he wasn't expecting that. He thought the wines were basically going to be white wines. They were very fresh and very lively, even though at that time they were probably 60 years old. So with this wine, he's trying to recreate that original style that his family made in the early 1900s when they first started making sparkling wine and champagne.
This one was made from a slight bit of very short amount of skin contact with the Pinot Noir. Sometimes rosés are made by adding red wine, just a small amount of red wine, to the white wine to give it that color and add a little flavor to it. This comes from 100% Pinot Noir, and all the color comes from that very short skin contact time, and then the skins are taken away to finish the product.
Right, there's no pressing to get any of the color out of the grapes. It's all just free run juice. So you just get that little tiny hint of pink to the wine.
But that extra color, and being 100% Pinot Noir, has a little bit of extra flavor. So for me, I like this with some of the richer dishes. If you could do this with, some little bit more things like pheasant. Obviously, partridge would be kind of a little fun little thing to do with this. But it also goes really well with some of those we're talking about high-fat dishes like foie gras, or goose liver, duck liver, those type of things that have that kind of richness to it. I think the Pinot Noir really kind of brings that together. I will say that though, when any of these things, some of my favorite kind of fun off-the-wall accompaniments, potato chips and popcorn. These things, a movie and they say popcorn and a Coke goes great, but if you're sitting at home, which a lot of us are watching movies right now, let some popcorn and some champagne, because that would go fabulously well.
Great.
So all of the two champagnes we have in the tasting both come in also half bottles, 375 milliliter bottles. We have and both of our champagnes priced fairly nicely. The full-size bottles coming in at $42.99 and $51.99, and just under $30 on both of the half bottles. So pretty good values in champagne, particularly considering the pedigree that these wines have. In closing, I would like to thank Michael Schiaparelli for being here with me tonight, helping me get through this.
And I would like to thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you guys for understanding that this year is a little bit different than any year in the past. We look forward to getting back to where we can actually have people in here meeting with it. That's really what I love doing. I love being here and talking directly to people and answering questions and being able to have feedback. That's really one of the reasons why I went into this business, is because I like the part of dealing with the people, with the public, talking about what they like and trying to help them find things that they want. Hopefully, when you guys have the opportunity to come in, you can get some of these wines to taste with us. All the wines are available for purchase. You don't have to have all of them all at one time. You can kind of enjoy them as it goes through. Or you can just buy one or two. They range in price from $15.99 to $51.99, and and kind of in between there. You can buy if you buy 6, though, you do get 10% off, a 10% discount. So we hope that you guys will come in, buy some sparkling wine, and enjoy maybe while you're doing the tasting, and maybe hopefully with Christmas and New Year's, hopefully we all have something to celebrate.